Started. So welcome again. While we only have a couple more weeks left in the semester, and I am going to talk to you about grant proposals, meaning your last project is actually writing a proposal for getting funding for the learning technology tool that you decide to adopt. And of course, you need funding. And your written work is actually going to be a grant proposal format. So you're going to understand the grant proposal, the elements of it, learning some of the strategies to align your projects with funders and opportunities, and any of the pitfalls in grant writing. And you're going to discover some tips on submitting some polished grant proposal writings. For me, over the years, I have put in countless grant proposals that have been rejected. But when you do get funding, I've gotten funding from CDC, NIH, NIA, all the national, foundations, as well as some of the foundations such as Robert Wood Johnson and San Antonio Aging Foundation. So some of the foundations and smaller grants from various different places, but it's like a tip of an iceberg. You write, I think there was a point where I was just writing grants for 5 years and only probably 5% hit. So it was really, really painful sometimes to write grants just because it has gotten a lot more competitive just because the funding has been lower over the years. So don't get discouraged just because you didn't get the funding. I have some folks who have gotten funding from CDC over the last 10 years, and they got a really great score from the reviewer. And usually in the past couple of years, if you get a score in that range, it's guaranteed funding. It turned out that they did not get the grant that they normally get, where they it's probably like 25% of their portfolio. So it's been a really, really tough season for grant writing these days. So why grant writing matters. Why does it matter? It unlocks funding for impactful projects. It also builds credibility and long-term relationship with funders. So not only are you raising your capital, but you also have, one of these government agencies or foundations recognizing an external entity, recognizing that what you're trying to do has value, impact, and also the change that we're trying to see. It also demonstrates alignment with organization and founders' goals. So there's a lot of synergy in terms of when you get the grant proposal. When you look at your written proposal that is due in a couple of weeks, it's the same component. So, and I'll share the PowerPoints with you, is the cover letter is always a standard in terms of you're introducing the project, your organization. Usually an executive summary or an abstract gives you an overview of the proposal. You have the statement of need. So why, right? So define the problem and its significance. And then you have to spell out the goal and objectives in your proposal. So what you aim to achieve, methodology, how you will accomplish your goals, meaning are you going to use quantitative, qualitative, mixed methodology? It also asks you to have an evaluation plan, meaning you need to have the metrics for success. All the 6 mini assignments that you've done it all. And now you're putting some finishing touches to it and putting more information. The budget, it's detailed cost breakdown and justification. So there's usually a cap on how much the funding agency will provide you, if it's restricted or unrestricted, how much indirect or direct costs, things, how much it's going to cost, and what kind of justification that you need to give. You also need sustainability plan. how the project will continue after funding. So this was not a requirement many years ago, but now after 5 years, let's say if you got a $5 million grant over the next 5 years. So 5 years that I asked you about your life. They want to know if how you're going to sustain that 5 year work, 5 years, $5 million work if the funding runs dry. So do you have other agencies or other places where you're going to get the money and also do the evaluation? So I'm going to just pause. My T is not showing up, so it's tailoring your proposal to the funder. So like anything else, when you looked at your writing your proposal, you notice that there's different funding agencies that you can choose from. And the ones that I'm going to talk about are the federal ones, because it's your tax dollars at work. And many of the information is easy to find online. So the first thing you need to do is research the funder's mission and values. So if you're going for nonprofit foundations, they usually have a website now where you can go and look at their mission and values. Before the internet, you actually had to visit, right? The funding agencies and get their brochures to figure out their mission, vision, and their strategic plan. You want to review the past funding projects for alignment. And so a lot of times especially federal grants, like I said, even if it's not posted, you could use Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, to get the federal grants that's been funded through Freedom of Information Act. They will send you a PDF file. It usually takes about 6 to 12 weeks to actually get those grants back. But you can look at successfully funded grants, especially federal ones that way, or it's widely available online. Some of the nonprofit organization also gives examples of past grants, because they want the grantee to follow a format, and it's easier for the reviewers to review your grants if you follow their formatting and also how they use whatever the questions that they have. You want to use the funder's language and terminology. So a lot of times, depending on what kind of funding agency that you are working with, like for example, CDC is very different from, even with the federal agencies, very different from FDA and some of the other government agencies. So you want to use the funder's language and terminology, and you want to emphasize how your project meets their priorities, meaning each year there's going to be a plan A, plan B, what they have to put the funding in. And by looking at their strategic plan and where they are trying to go in the next 1, 3, 5 years, it's going to help you to see whether or not you're a good fit. And so for any proposal or anything that you write in our program, you want to use clear, concise, and jargon-free language. So as all of us know, those of you who have prior military or in the military, there's a lot of acronyms that translate well in the military population, but not to the civilian world. So you want to just make sure that you don't assume anything when you write any kind of acronyms. Always spell it out in the beginning before you use the acronyms. You have to tell a compelling story about project's impact, meaning people always ask me, it's a technical writing. I'm writing for NIH, NIA, all these federal agencies. Why would they need a compelling story about the project's impact? They get thousands and thousands of grants because they need the funding to run their programs. But if you don't have a story that is relatable, and it also forecasts whether or not you're able to communicate whatever finding that you have to the greater public, that it may actually put you in a disadvantage if you don't have a compelling story to tell. So let me pause the recording. Okay, and then you have to address all the evaluation criteria outlined in the RFP. So request for funding proposals. So a lot of the agencies, and I have some examples that I can share with you, and then you're going to work in small groups, is it's going to tell you that you have to do certain things during your grant proposal period, where there's reports that have to go out every year or every quarterly or every 6 months to show how you are progressing and how well you are spending the funds. You want to use visuals like charts and graphs to enhance the readability. So if you can use timelines or mind maps or tables or any kind of graphics, it's going to be really important to utilize that in your proposal. You want to make sure that you proofread for errors and ensure there's consistent formatting. Some agencies are very, very strict about different fonts, different size, formatting. So there are certain people who are trying to, they say one page and then they try to manipulate the margins. But the instruction says, you need to have 1-inch margins, let's say. Then even if you have a compelling grant proposal, for example, you won't meet that criteria because it's an indicator that you won't be following some of the detail-oriented reporting. So you want to make sure that you're following all the instructions. So another pitfalls to avoid is misalignment with funding priorities, meaning you want to make sure that you are looking at their most current website and what they're doing. Vague or unrealistic objectives. So I have some people who are working on violence prevention work. It is very, very important work, and we do have to address it. However, I have some folks who are telling me, I want to end all domestic violence in San Antonio. It's unrealistic in terms of objective, very, very noble goal, but it's how are you going to do that, right? So you want to also make sure that you are reading the guidelines. Each RFPs or requests for funding guidelines are going to be very specific. And if you're using overly technical language or excessive jargon, they're also going to be turned off, meaning this is a pitfall that happens to a lot of quantitative researchers and also a lot of science and data-driven scientists, where they start describing the intricacies of what's happening in the background, and they lose majority of the reviewers. So you want to just make sure that you have enough technical language, not using a lot of jargons, but giving enough information that you don't lose rest of the group. Weak or missing evaluation and sustainability plan. So just putting like a line on evaluation or not going into depth in terms of evaluation is going to be an issue. So whenever you write grants, I know many of you have done this before because you are in executive positions or leadership positions where I always tell folks that I am a professional beggar just because we're always looking for funding for our next project, or sustain our next project or the current project that we're on. So what reviewers are looking for, so usually they are subject matter experts in the area that you're submitting your grant proposal. A lot of you are integrating AI or learning technology such as, I know some of you are using some apps, some of you are using the learning management system, etc. You want to make sure that there's clarity. Are your goals and methodology well defined? You want to have relevance. So does a project align with funders' mission? So you want to make sure that When you're applying to these grants, technology is one of the things, or innovation is one of the things that they mention in their mission, vision, or their strategic plan. Feasibility, are the objectives achievable within the timeline and the budget? So some grants are for 1 year, some grants are for multiple years, 3 years, or some grants are for 5. So you want to just make sure the objectives are achievable within the time frame and budget that you're asking for. And the other thing that they're looking for is, will the project create meaningful change? And so I know at the beginning of the class, I asked you about what you would like to do. And one of the things that we kind of laughed at was the whole influencers, right? The reason why they're getting a lot of funding is because they're making an impact. You can actually see what kind of impact that they have due to millions of followers, regardless of whether or not it's a positive or negative impact. We're able to see it in metrics, what the reach is. So, of course, for the grant, it's a little bit more intricate, but you want to just make sure that impact is measurable. You can't just say it's going to, we're going to meet societal needs of, decreasing domestic violence or hunger, etc., or homelessness, for example. You want to have specific metrics, like there's going to be a 5% decrease in homelessness in San Antonio. So you want to ensure the compliance, you want to double check. So these are some of the submission checklists. Accuracy of budget calculations. I know budget is something that people don't want to even look at. However, if your numbers are off and it doesn't match up, it also creates that red flag. So I know there's a couple of you working in finance and also know what the grant system is like. That's going to be very, very important. You want to include all the required attachment. So a lot of times you think your project is really important. I know some of you have done some front end work where you are talking to IT specialists, superintendents of schools, other supervisors, or other decision makers to just make sure that you are able to do this. Letters of support has to be also attached to the proposal. For your assignment, you don't need it. So you can talk about, these are support letters that I need to get, but it's not a requirement to actually have them. Submit early to avoid technical issues. For example, those of you who, this happens all the time. So you have to look at the time zone. So if you're submitting to different agencies, they have Eastern Standard Time. So if you are late because you thought that it was a different time zone, they're not going to accept it. So I know that I was talking about examples to show you what you can do. And one of the examples that I've used throughout the semester is using AI in public health workforce capacity building. So we're seeing that there's a lot of promise of using AI, integrating AI in public health workforce capacity building because of various reasons. So when you go into your written proposal assignment, I have a list of different agencies, and I told you there is more. And I told you last week that we're going to look at National Science Foundation, NSF. And within NSF, there's Expanding AI Innovation Through Capacity Building Partnership. It's called Expand AI Program. And it's a program that aims to broaden the AI research, education, and workplace development by specifically looking at capacity building projects. So you are partnering up with National AI Research Institute ecosystem, specifically NSF, to build out this workforce capacity. So if you go to this website, let me just get the link for you so you can take a look. So if you go to the NSF website, and when you look at this website, it's going to show you the information here. And so let me open up the link for you. So if you go to this site, and like I said, I didn't want to go back and forth on the page, so it should open up for this website here. And if you go through the website, it kind of gives you all the important information. So in your group work, you're going to look at different components of it to see what resonates for you and what questions that you may have. So this is one type of agency that you can choose to submit your written work. So details of AI, the Expand AI program. So if you go to the website, I just did a little bit of summary for you. And of course, you have to spend some time with your team to just go through line by line to figure out what their main objective, all that stuff, and then also the criteria. So objective, as you can see, it's developing capacity and fostering partnership. And they want a diverse participation in AI-related fields. So they don't want all comp sci or industry folks. They want people from different walks of life. So the capacity building pilots, they're going to give roughly about $400,000 over 2 years. And then if you are doing a partnership, it could be from 300 to 700 per year up to 4 years. So you have to re-up and you have to reapply for each year to show that you're eligible. They're open to institution aiming to build capacity, particular those collaborating with AI research institutions. So if the institution already are doing AI work, the high likelihood of you getting the grant is a lot higher than someone without an AI program. So these are some of the highlights. So like I said, in your small groups, you're going to take a look. And when we, what we're trying to accomplish, so you have to kind of sit back, you have your 6 assignments, and you have to tell yourself, basically what happens to everyone, including myself, is you start looking at different grant agencies and you get really overwhelmed. Meaning depending on which institution that you're at. So for me, I've been at research intensive institution, R1 institution, where you have professional researchers who are pulling in from 5 million to 50 million to $100 million a year over the 5 years for their research, because they are renowned in their area of expertise, that they have a dream team that can execute whatever they're doing, and they have the trust, expertise, and experience. We are in a teaching institution, so we don't have the infrastructure that you would see at Columbia, Harvard, or Johns Hopkins, or Caltech, Stanford, just because they've been doing it for many years and they're a research institution. For our institution, we're more focused on teaching, on trying to get more research out there with all of you who are PhD students, to gain more research and gain more funding from external funders. So what you need to do is, with your 6 assignments, the mini assignments, you have to step back and figure out what was the problem that you were trying to solve. So in my case, the example that I'm giving you is public health professionals lack skills to leverage AI. A solution is to develop training programs to build workforce capacity. And the impact is improve disease surveillance, resource allocations, and health equity. So like I said, this is very grand, and we're going to get into more granular aspect of it with more precise numbers. But if you're feeling overwhelmed, you have to just sit back and figure out what was the problem, what was the solution that you had proposed? So what learning technology did you decide to integrate, and what kind of impact that you're looking for, which is the 6 assignments that you worked on. So how do you align the proposal with the objective? So you know the topic that I'm working on. So now we're looking at this NSF Expand AI objectives. And basically, you need to look at your statement of need. When you look at the Expand AI objectives, their problem identification, they highlight the gap. So you need to highlight the gap in AI proficiency among public health professionals, emphasizing why it's needed in this complex health challenges. And then you have to also give supporting statistics demonstrating why the lack of AI skill is actually going to cause some harm. So meaning, let me move myself. So example, so in your proposal, like I said, if you're having a hard time, like I said, start big and then start going small. And that's one of the reasons why I asked you, start looking at the library, get some statistics. So you could see that there's a significant gap that exists in AI literacy among public health professionals. So this is all done by looking at the literature review that you've been doing. So data point 1. So one of the studies found only 10% public health professionals are proficient in AI tool. So, and then data point 2, emerging technologies such as, machine learning, predictive analytics remain underutilized due to workforce capacity. So this is where I told you about the 60% of the public health professionals are retiring, which means that their knowledge of all the things that they've done, they're bringing with them. They're not leaving them at work. So as you move back, and those of you who are visual, I'm very visual as well, is to kind of plan out, okay, this is great. The project actually aligns with the Expand AI goal, because their whole AI goal, the Expand AI goal, was to broaden AI knowledge by addressing specific sectors in different fields. So we are looking at public safety and public health equity. And so going back to the NSF, you're kind of looking at their objectives and your objectives all at once. And that's one of the reasons why I asked you to think about your project without any kind of hindrance. When you start writing grants, there's going to be guardrails and things that you have to fit in. So you want to develop and implement, in our case for public health, workforce AI training, is to have AI training that's tailored for public health professionals to enhance their capacity to use the AI tools. So one of the objectives is we want to develop a curriculum, we want to train, and we want to have partnerships with AI Research Institute to have quality and relevance, meaning we don't want any kind of, we develop a curriculum, but it has to change, right? Everything is moving. So how do you set the goals and objective that is more tailored, right? So once you figured out, wow, there's an alignment, how do you figure out the goals and objectives? So in this case, like I said, I'll share the slides with you, is the main goal is to develop a sustainable AI training program for public health professionals. So you're adapting AI, fostering long-term capacity and collaboration. So the first objective is a curriculum development. And so we have to kind of come up with a curriculum that we gather subject matter experts to create it. Second, we have to develop a workforce training. So notice that we wrote 300 public health professionals across urban and rural health departments within 2 years. So this is based on your research, meaning, is it feasible? How many people are allowed to take this course and how many sites? So in Texas, we're huge. Therefore, there's multiple health departments where if you get 10 people training at multiple sites, we can hit 300 public health professionals within 2 years. How do you also create open access toolkit? So how do we create that? And that's another objective that's measurable. And then partnership formation. So one of the things that the objectives that the Expand AI wanted was, we don't want grants that are going to just work by themselves. We want partnerships. So we are going to show how we are partnering with the health department and as well as UIW to establish workforce capacity as well as expertise within our school. Another thing that's going to be part and key of your grant proposal is your methodology. So when you state all these objectives, you need to have a method. So curriculum development, how you're going to go about doing that. Training delivery, how is that going to be like? So you have to talk about blended online in person. Is it going to be synchronous, asynchronous? So you have to go all into those details, incorporating practical case studies and hands-on sessions to talk about what you're going to be doing. And it depends on your stakeholders and what kind of relationships that you have. And then the partnership, what does it look like and how it's going to help the funding agency. So methodology. So if you were to actually write these out, like I said, those of you who've done this before, it's always good to have different phases and different steps. So phase one, they love timelines. So in this case, they talked about it's going to be 2 years. We're looking at the funding is to the phase one, we're going to do a needs assessment to figure out what kind of knowledge do we have and what kind of training needs that we need, and then consult with AI experts and practitioners to design our curriculum. And then phase two is the whole curriculum development, right? So we're looking at modules, we're looking at different statistics, geographic information. We might need some GIS. We need to do some pilot testing on some of the modules to make sure that we could do the split testing with alpha beta to figure out which one works better for local health departments before we deploy things out. So those of you who've been in software development, for instance, this may sound really familiar because we're taking a product, in our case, training material using AI, integrating AI, and trying to figure out how is it best to deliver that information, and you have to test that. Phase three, training delivery, for example, 9 to 12 months. We want to show what works best in real world public health setting, meaning it may work really well in university setting, but it may not work in actual health departments. Because if you have not worked in a health department before, whatever you devise in an academic setting, it's not going to work. So we want to make sure that you pilot test it and making sure that it works, and then also developing that mentorship. And then phase four is developing a toolkit, for example. So it's overlapping. We're doing all this at once in terms of develop an open access AI toolkit that we're talking about. And like I said, our goal is to integrate AI. So that's a learning technology tool that we're trying to infuse with the health department, is trying to get some sample data set to pre-configure the machine learning models to make sure that it works, best practices for AI integration in public health, and then being able to disseminate this in an online platform, other health conferences, so people are aware of what you're doing. Because in that way, you're also evaluating and also creating that sustainability, because while you're working on this grant, you have to be working on another grant to just make sure that once the grant finishes, there's a possibility that you may not get renewed. And then phase five is always ongoing, meaning that you have to evaluate and get feedback, especially if you're working with learning technology or any kind of tech tool, that you want to do a pre and post training We also have different workers moving in different departments. So you want to collect qualitative as well as quantitative feedback, as well as focus groups to ensure that you are gathering all the information that you need. And so when you look at the NSF grant, it talks about assessment and sustainability plan. So it's one of the things that they require. So you need to, and that's one of the reasons why you've done the 6 mini assignments. You looked at the KPIs, how you're going to do an evaluation, what are some of the stumbling blocks that you're going to have, and what kind of communication that you're going to have to let people know what you're doing. So you are measuring the pre and post evaluation. Specifically, we're looking at the AI and public health scenarios, and sustainability, meaning how are you going to, once we develop this curriculum, how are we going to sustain it after the funding runs out? So what are some long-term continuation? Are we going to charge? What are we going to do? So the examples of evaluation, and that's one of the reasons why I asked you to think about what metrics, because depending on what project you're working on, the metric for success is going to be very different for someone who is adopting, let's say, a learning management system versus, let's say, AI tool. Very similar, but some of the metrics are going to be very different. So number of participants trained and certified in AI fundamentals, improvement in participants' AI proficiency. So we're going to look at pre and post, and then having a toolkit download and adoption rates by public health agencies. So some of the metrics that we're thinking about that's easy to gather without a lot of human resources per se. Data collections, it has to be ongoing in terms of surveys, case studies, evaluations, and project reports, where all the people involved know the schedule, usage and analytic tools for online resources. So this is when those of you who are programmers, having the data visualization is going to be really important. Dashboards to show what is happening, because a lot of times what happens is you get this grant, partner up with the organization, usually community-based or health departments. They get so frustrated because as academics, we know what's going on, but we don't do such a great job of communicating what they have found until a lot later. So it has to be an ongoing communication. And then impact assessment, monitoring the AI implementation for us is disease surveillance or public health intervention within the participation organization structure to show the short-term, medium, and also the long-term impact of what's happening. Because once you come in and get the grant, you're still going to have some folks who are naysayers or won't support you. Or be a roadblock in terms of moving things forward. So they could be one of your decision makers who is not going to let you move forward, which becomes an issue. So in terms of sustainability, what are you going to do? So you have to think about, let's say if you get the 2-year grant, what are you going to do afterwards? So you want to have institutional integration. So a lot of times when you are submitting a grant, the grant agency want to see maybe the institution can actually invest some of their funds after the 2-year runs out. You also want to show that AI researchers or AI Institute, if there is one in the university, is willing to share those man hours with the project. Long-term funding, you have to kind of look at where funding sources may be. There may be fundraisers, there may be donors, there may be any kind of ongoing support that shows that there's a possibility, high probability that it will go on, even if the funding does run out in the initial 2 years. And then adoption rate, meaning is the curriculum easy enough and the toolkit easy enough for other sectors? So Once you create this is an intellectual property that could be utilized. Maybe you can generate some funding, could generate also what we talked about, like an influencer, right? Meaning this university and this health department in collaboration came up with this wonderful curriculum that is going to be utilized by everyone in public health agencies. So that's actually going to be one of those global health initiatives that can actually roll out. That would be win-win for sure. The budget justification, like I said, you did this in your mini assignments, is personnel, materials, technology, and evaluation. Everything costs money. Is it salaried? Are you going to hire consultants? Development of training materials, everything costs money, right? Technology, I think all of you did such a fantastic job of talking about how much it costs to acquire the technology, but maintaining that technology and having the infrastructure to support it. And the evaluation costs with assessing the program effectiveness as an ongoing. Are you going to hire someone external, or do you have an internal folks out there? So let's say we decided that we are asking for about $250,000 worth of funding. This is just a rough summary. The budget justification is going to be more detailed, meaning it's going to ask you to actually spell out how many hours, how many people, and break that down. But if you are stuck with the budget, what you could do is start out like this, meaning let's get the big chunk items and then move it into a finer details a little later. And so another thing that you'll see in a lot of the grant is project timeline. So if you have a project manager or someone who has managed projects before in any kind of industry, they're a gem, just because you are looking at the 2-year time frame that you're looking at, and it gives you an information of what you need to be doing. So the first 3 months, we're doing a needs assessment. On the next 5 months, we're working on the curriculum development, training delivery. Meanwhile, all the evaluations are happening all throughout. And then the toolkit development. So like I said, this is not comprehensive, but it gives you an idea of a visual that you want to include for your grant funders. So you do have to spell it out in words, but this also gives you a nice diagram for all your team members to figure out what you need to be doing. The strategic partnership, like I said, it's one of the bigger components where it's a win-win proposition, meaning by giving you the grant, you're partnering up with a national organization, and having a partnership with academic institution that specialize in public health informatics is also a win for National Science Foundation as well. And then also having industry partnership, think about being partners with Meta or OpenAI, for example, right? It's also going to give a huge edge for your partnership. Or even Amazon. Amazon is using a lot of AI stuff. So leveraging these partnerships can ensure alignment with the initial grantor that you're applying to, but it also kind of shows that if you partner with me, you also will have further partnerships. So like anything in life, I know we like to think that academia is not a business per se. It's a nonprofit organization that still needs to generate. Money does not come internally. We have to seek them out. So if you are thinking about applying to NSF, which is fine because you can also utilize whatever grants that are out there, what you want to do is you want to address the public need in the public health, but also contributes to the broader goal of what they're interested in. So don't forget, because a lot of times when people pitch their ideas, I know on Shark Tank, for example, I know it's a great show that's been on for over a decade. And when you're pitching your ideas, the pitch has to also resonate with one of the sharks. So it's the same thing with grant proposals. You could be super smart, but if it doesn't resonate with the grant funder and what they're trying to do in the next 2, 5, 10 years, they're not going to fund you. So this is another checklist that we talked about earlier in terms of making sure you have all the components that they want. So it's always good to work in teams. So I'm going to end here, end the recording and get all your